Hello EFT squad and welcome back to the Euro Roundup with me and Pat. No games, obviously, still desperate for some action, but we're going to do league previews instead. The European Big Four, starting with La Liga and the Bundesliga this week, Serie A and Liga next week. And what better man to start La Liga with than Patrick van Straten, who was famously born in Valencia. I believe there's a plaque outside the Mestalla. Here lies Patrick van Baby.
Yep.
With a gold bust.
I'd die as a baby.
Yeah. Well,
interesting. The death of my innocence, anyway. Should we start with Barcelona then?
Why
who,
not?
of course, won the league with ease last season, 14 points ahead of Atletico Madrid. They, of course, also won the Copa del Rey, beating Sevilla 5-0 in the final. Now, they finished with more points 4 times over the last decade, despite the fact they only lost 1 game. Only twice have they scored fewer goals, and they've conceded fewer goals on 3 occasions. So while it looked like it was going to be an historic season if they went unbeaten, it ended up finishing in a little bit of a kind of sour place.
Anticlimactic?
Yeah, they did well in the big games, of course, won 3-0 at the Bernabeu, drew 1-1 at the Wanda Metropolitano. But for them, the aim this year is going to be improving on a disappointing Champions League campaign. They topped a group containing Juve, then they smashed Chelsea in the last 16 before throwing away that 4-1 lead against Roma in the quarterfinals. And they went out in really, really dull fashion. I mean, like, they didn't even go out like Barcelona style, you know, like taking a million shots and just happening not to put them in. They just went out really meekly. It was a strange one.
On a whim, Patrick. This might be explained by and large by the fact they were so dependent on Leo Messi and Luis Suarez last season. Only those guys scored more than double digits in the league. However, that might be arrested by the fact that Ousmane Dembele is back now. He looked great at various parts of the tail end of last season. And Phil Coutinho scored a few goals after January, didn't he? And you'd imagine with the Brazilian in that midfield 3, their shot numbers would increase, not dramatically, but they definitely experienced an upturn. However, saying that, only Real Madrid fired off more shots per game than Barcelona's 15.3. But Barcelona far more efficient in terms of getting shots on target with 7.2 to Real Madrid's 7.4 from 18.4. So the attack was quite economic last season, but definite areas for improvement there in terms of the supporting cast. Their defence, who we sort of championed for the first half of the season at least, actually became quite leaky towards the tail end when Piqué experienced a little bit of burnout, when Titi got injured and Yerry Mina had to step in. They conceded 11.7 shots per game, the joint 7th best in the league. Surprisingly, Eibar topping that, conceding the fewest with 8.5. Nice. Whoever their defensive coach is, get him in. But not really made any great waves in the summer in terms of signings. They've had quite a quiet summer so far, haven't they? Only brought in 21-year-old central midfielder Arthur, who's supposed to be quite a prodigious young talent. They got him from Gremio, 27.9 million. He really impressed in the Copa Libertadores in particular, didn't he, last season? And Clement Lenglet for 32.3 million, who I think they see as the long-term heir to sort of Piqué's position in that team as the ball-playing centre-half, as the guy who's going to step out of defence, break the lines, go on those sort of daring runs that kind of throw other midfielders into disarray. And they clearly rate Lenglet because they've given him a €300 million release clause. Now, the most high-profile move they've made is for Willian. We discussed this over on Transfer Review.
Sure.
Which actually features on Football Daily this week. Go and check that out after you've watched this. And, we're quite puzzled as to why they're making a £55 million move for Willian, right? What are your thoughts on that before we move on to Real Madrid?
I don't really understand it. I mean, like, it would make sense if they were still looking for a right back and they thought they could convert him into a right wing back. That actually would kind of make sense to me. I don't really see where there's space for him in the attacking positions. They've got Messi on the right, they've got Dembele on the left, they've got Suarez, and then they've got Coutinho behind them, who can, of course, also fill in that left wing role. I think Dembele is going to have a huge season next year. I think Coutinho is going to be good. Yeah, I don't really understand Willian's role. If the aim is just to get depth, they could do that for less money with a younger player. And so it does seem a little bit of a strange one for me. The great thing about having a settled front line is that you can actually take punts on young players and hope they come good, which is what happened a few years ago when Barcelona passed up the chance to go and sign Marco Asensio and Real Madrid did it instead. That's the kind of thing that they should be doing at the moment. So a little bit disappointing that they're not. It seems like some guys could be on the way out, though I guess that might defray the cost. Everton apparently interested in Luca Digne. They're apparently interested in Yerimina as well. So who knows? Maybe they can sell some guys and raise some funds. Plus Paulinho's already gone, so cash burning a hole in their pocket maybe.
And Andre Gomes has been linked with Arsenal, so they do have some very sellable assets, don't they? I actually think they should be moving for a forward. Don't want to be controversial here, but I think Luis Suarez needs replacing as soon as possible. While they were quite reliant on him last season, he's been in decline for the last 2 years. And given his full throttle playing style, I'm not sure he's the type of centre forward who scores you 20 goals past the age of 30, 31. Don't get me wrong, I think he's got a couple of years left at the very, very top, at the very least. But I think they should be in the market for a potential number 9 at the moment.
Who would you go for?
Oh, that's a very interesting
Because I like Paco.
question.
I think Paco's a good player.
He's a good rotation player, isn't it? I can't see him ever starting in this Barcelona. Well,
which is a pity.
Being relied upon for 25 goals.
Because his scoring rate was pretty much Barcelona standard when he was at Valencia. So I hope that if they do bring in a forward, they let him go. But I mean, they could go and take a punt on Martial. They could go and get somebody. Depends what profile of striker they want, really.
Martial sprang to mind, but they have a lot of wingers who can maybe operate as that second striker, don't they? Maybe Ousmane Dembele can maybe be converted into that sort of role moving forward. Not sure, but I don't know. I'd like to see Paulo Dybala there.
That would be interesting. Though again, like not exactly, not an exact
9,
fit. Yeah.
It's difficult, isn't it? I don't think there's a whole lot of candidates out there that currently scream to me I could lead this Barcelona line or feasibly lead it in terms of who they could move for. We've seen Alvaro Morata be linked with, moves back to Juventus, moves to Dortmund, sorry. He'd definitely be a gear change for them, wouldn't he? If they could go and pick him up for 17 as opposed to Willian for 54. That'd be controversial, wouldn't it? But I don't really have any great suggestions. Maybe we should throw this out to our fans. Who do you think Barcelona should be targeting? Let us know in the comments below.
We're actually skipping over second place in La Liga next, and we head down to third, where we find Real Madrid. How are they shaping up going into the new season?
Los Blancos, as you know, all the boffins refer to them as.
Boffins?
Yeah.
I haven't heard that word.
Knowledge. Huh? Get? Yeah, they had a weird season last season, didn't they? They finished third with 76 points, their lowest points tally since 2006-07 when they somehow still won the league. But a lot of odd went down, sort of mid-noughties, didn't it, in La Liga? Valencia winning the league. Villarreal coming second. Depor at the start of the millennium. It was a weird and wonderful place, and one that I much preferred, Pat.
Yeah.
But alas, we move on. And their 94 league goals was their lowest tally since 2008-09, and they haven't conceded more than their 44 league goals since the same year. So, I mean, not hard to kind of work out that they had somewhat of a disappointing season, but the stats suggest it too. Aside from that, had a more successful time in the Cup, obviously, the 13th Champions League in the bag. It meant that Zidane could walk off into the sunset with his head held high. However, did crash out domestically to Leganes in the quarterfinals of the Copa del Rey. No doubt that would have hurt the hierarchy at the club. And Zidane, who won 69.8% of his games and 9 trophies across his 28-month spell, resigned 5 days after that UCL loss, didn't he? Citing the club's need for change. Why do you think he left? We haven't actually spoke about this at any great length.
I think he just saw an ageing squad. Like, I mean, I'd look at it and think, how can he improve? He wins 3 consecutive Champions Leagues, and then you look around at the squad and you can tell it's ageing. By that point, Cristiano Ronaldo may have already said that he wanted to go, and so maybe you think, let somebody else rebuild this, because all I'm going to do is kind of tarnish my legacy. If I were him, I probably would have thought about leaving then as well. He's gone out on an amazing high, and now I think it won't just be Lopetegui who oversees this rebuild. I think it will be 2 or 3 managers before they maybe have a generation to rival the one that's coming to its end now.
Yeah, you raise a few salient points there, and I think we're going to see other big mainstays of that Real Madrid team leave during the course of this summer. Of course, Karim Benzema has been linked with AC Milan, and he's ageing now, isn't he? And maybe doesn't feature in Lopetegui's plans in the absence of Cristiano Ronaldo. He was sort of the star supporting cast member of, wasn't he? But yeah, like you said, on the subject of the new manager, he was somewhat of a surprise appointment, wasn't he? 2 days before the World Cup kicked off, and then Rubiables, who's the president of the Spanish FA subsequently kicked off. Hierro ended up taking that Spanish team to the World Cup, but things got very nasty there, toxic, didn't they? The Spanish FA said Real Madrid approached Lopetegui in a very underhand fashion, and it'll be interesting to see if all that hoo-ha was worth it at the start of this season. But just when you think Real Madrid are done and dusted in the headlines, Cristiano Ronaldo, who's flirted with leaving Real Madrid every year for the past 2 or 3 seasons and who normally ends up with a bumper contract as a result, actually leaves the club and heads to Turin in a mammoth deal. The man responsible for 33% of all Real Madrid's goals, league goals that is, since 2009-2010. How do they fill a void like that whilst also ensuring continuity managerially speaking?
I think they've got to kind of rely on some of the gambles they've made paying off. You know, obviously Marco Asensio's got to step it up. If they keep Benzema, then he's got to rediscover his scoring form. They've also got 18-year-old Flamengo forward Vinicius Junior arriving. He comes in for more than 40 million euros. Now, that was a fee they agreed when he'd only played 17 minutes of senior football. And last season, 6 goals, 3 assists in 19 appearances. It's okay, but for somebody coming out of the Brazilian league, you expect to see incredible numbers. I mean, Neymar had over 100 professional goals before he went to Barcelona. Even Gabigol had banged them in reliably. And instead they've got this guy who they've now got to assume will become their Kylian Mbappe or something. It's very difficult, but they do have money that they can go out and spend. The question is how well they're going to spend it. They brought in Odriozola, the right back from Real Sociedad.
Who we like, right?
He's a fantastic player, but they've paid £35 million, and arguably this is a position where they're not particularly sure. They've got Carvajal, who I think we can all agree is probably the best right back in the world. Then they've got Nacho, who can back up that position. They've got Achraf Hakimi, who got a lot of minutes at the beginning of the season. So I could go into Odriozola's numbers, but it's more the question of how they're using their resources here. What I worry about is how they rebuild an attack that has to be elite. It really does. The defence is solid. The defence will be okay, especially with Casemiro shielding it. And if Lopetegui just simply rejigs the formation and doesn't rely on Sergio Ramos saving them every time, which was kind of Zidane's strategy, I don't think he was a particularly good defensive coach, then that'll be fine. But how do you replace Ronaldo? How do you replace an attack that has been this good for this long?
Yeah,
I really don't know.
Very clearly, they're not moving for a guy who's going to score 40 goals a season. There's been the Lewandowski rumours died off a long time ago, didn't they? There's kind of rumblings in January, but it never materialised. And I mean, there's only a handful of guys in world football that are going to replace that output. So I think their tact is to go for a new front line who are going to score 20 goals apiece, maybe a bit like Carlo Ancelotti's Chelsea, you know. Yeah. And on the subject of Chelsea, Eden Hazard looks like he may be their star signing of the season. But I think his best return to date in the league is 16 goals, right?
Yeah, and that's with taking penalties. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, I think we probably all agree that if he were in a more attacking system, he'd be able to get more goals. You know, when you think about him getting 15 or 16 goals, he was doing this under guys like Conte and Mourinho, who are primarily defensive coaches and don't really commit men forward. If he's got more support and he can stay a bit further up the pitch because there are guys doing the creative work further back, then you'd have thought that tally will increase. But it's still a little bit worrying. Maybe they play Bale as a centre forward and rely on Asensio and Hazard, but I still don't see that attack outscoring the one this season unless Lopetegui can do some very savvy attacking coaching, you know, and maybe introduce a new style of playing which would kind of redress some of that balance. If you look around, it's extremely hard to pick players who are gettable and are Real Madrid standards. You know, they could go and try and get an Insigne, they could gamble on guys like Memphis Depay or Leon Bailey, but that's not really what Real Madrid do, and they're a little bit hamstrung by the fans' attitude and by Florentino Perez's attitude, which is we must have the biggest, most marketable stars in the world.
Maybe they should move for Pulisic.
I think that'd be great. I think Pulisic would be great. I also think Anthony Martial would be great. I think there are lots of sensible moves they can do. It's just I don't expect them to do them.
I like Martial as well. He's kind of got that second striker vibe, hasn't he? I don't think he's going to play wide left forever.
No.
But I think in terms of the next team we're going to talk about, there's never been a better time to sort of really muscle in on the top, the action at the summit of La Liga. So, without ado, let's move on to Atletico Madrid.
After 3 consecutive third-place finishes, Atletico Madrid finished second last season with 79 points between Barcelona and Real Madrid. That'll be the first time in a long time. But 2 years prior, they actually finished third with 88 points. So overall, the number of points at the very top of the league has diminished. Maybe it's getting a little bit more even, or maybe the top sides are just not performing the way they were. Either way, it does give Atleti a little bit of an opportunity. If they could hit 85, if they could hit 90 this season, then who even knows where they could end up. And Antoine Griezmann's going to be a key figure in that. He's re-signed until 2023. Last year, 29 goals and 15 assists in all competitions, as of course they won the Europa League. Plus, there have been some movements in the transfer market. Obviously, Thomas Lemar arrives for a fee that could be as high as £63 million. Now, that's very, very steep for him, but I do think he'll be good for them. They've also brought in Villarreal defensive midfielder Rodri, extremely young player, 22 years old, same as Lemar, for about 16 million, and he is absolutely sensational. I believe we covered him on a scout report, which I think we'll put a link to. Luca Hernandez as well, also 22, signed a contract extension until 2024. So it's good that they're basically finding ways to get these guys signed up in the long term, given that their lineup on the last day of the season had an average age of almost 29 years old. They do need to find ways to get Jimenez, to get Thomas Partey playing more.
And Correa, who's also 23, so they have that mixture of experience and youth right through the spine of the team. And if they can continue to conduct savvy business, like Rodri, like Vasalco, who they got for £15 million from Sassuolo last season, who looks like a very worthy heir to Juan Fran at right back, then, like Pato said, I think they can really challenge at the summit of La Liga this season. Now, defensively sound, obviously, like we've come to expect in a Simeone system, top 4 tackles per game on 24.2. That is absolutely monstrous. I think the next closest is around 20, but they did overperform in the final third, scoring 58 when expected goals had them down to score 50. So maybe a little bit too reliant on the conversion rate of someone like Griezmann. And if he wasn't so clinical, we might see them tumble a little bit in the league, which I suppose married with the fact when you're already 7th for goals scored, 16th for shots per game and 9th for shots on target and 14th for shots inside the box doesn't necessarily bode well. So who could the mattress men sign to alleviate some pressure on Griezmann, on Diego Costa, or have they already done that in the form of Thomas Lemar?
I don't really expect Lemar to be hugely prolific. I think he's going to be a creator, but that's always been what he is, rather than a goal scorer. I mean, who knows? Because they'll counter-attack, that should play to his strengths. But I think he's expected to run the counter-attack as opposed to get on the end of it. Correa, obviously, like you said, very, very good young player. He's going to play primarily as a forward, so you'd expect him to get some goals. The Giroud links, I'm not sure I really understand it. Like, obviously a good player, obviously dovetails well with Griezmann, but to me, he's more limited than Costa. He can't do the running the channels that Costa does. He's not going to press in the way that Costa does. So that one, I'm not really wild about. I think that this has got to be the season where you say, Correa's our guy. He either gets these goals, he either helps us out in the front line, or we've got to let him go. There's no point in them giving him limited minutes again and not trusting him anymore. Otherwise, you may as well sell him, especially given that last summer, it seemed that there was interest in him around about the 40 million mark. If you're not going to give him a chance now with Carrasco gone, then you're probably never going to give him a chance.
Yeah, I'd expect, like you said, for him to get more minutes. Given the fact they loaned Vieto out last season to Valencia, was it? And maybe Sevilla the season before as well.
He's been out a couple of times.
They clearly sort of back him over Vieto. Maybe Vieto is going to be the one to make way, to generate funds for other positions elsewhere. But Diego Simeone, you wouldn't put it past him to kind of squeeze even more out of what he's got. He'd be an expert at sort of getting that last bit of toothpaste out of the Colgate, wouldn't they? Who do you think Atletico need to sign, or have they conducted their business? Do you see this team challenging for the title as is? Let us know in the comments below.
Moving on to the Bundesliga now, there's only one place we can start, and obviously it's in Munich. How are Bayern looking going into a season where they're expected to win a title despite having changed manager.
Our analysis of this might be a little bit quicker, right? Given that the Bundesliga has been a foregone conclusion.
And it is lunchtime.
For the last 6 years. And, I'm Hank Marvin. Bayern Munich now, like I said, won the Bundesliga 6 years in a row, only suffered their first home defeat in 2 years on the last day of last season, losing 4-1 to Stuttgart. No major transfer activity so far. They've sold Douglas Costa for 35.2 million, which actually looks like an absolute snip in the current market, and bought in Goretzka on a free, which actually looks like an absolute snip at this point in the market from Schalke. Renato Sanchez and Serge Gnabry returned from their various loan duties, having fared very differently. Serge Gnabry having a very promising time of it at Hoffenheim, and Renato Sanchez looking good pre-season, actually. Scored against PSG in a much changed kind of setup. But I kind of expect Gnabry to... It's a difficult one this season, because I kind of expect Gnabry to be what... French guy was linked with Arsenal.
Come on.
What Kingsley Coman has been to Bayern Munich this season. Kind of that useful bit part player. But then, where does that leave Coman?
Yeah.
And in turn, where does that leave Gnabry? Of course, the biggest change this season, the seismic change, has been that of manager. The Silver Fox has gone. He's gone off to the distance with another league title. And 46-year-old Niko Kovac from Eintracht Frankfurt, who were the surprise package of last season, has come in. He had a success rate of 41.7% over his 2 seasons with the club, and is an absolute thoroughbred dilf.
Yeah, he does look pretty good. I've got to give him that. He's a handsome bloke, but he only took Frankfurt to 8th last season. They did win a cup, though. Of course, I think it was like it was over a 20-year
historic gap.
Yeah, it was a massive gap between their last trophy and this one, and they beat Bayern Munich in the final, which certainly helps. It actually looks like Bayern's biggest move might be wrapping someone up for next year. Benjamin Pavard, who impressed at Stuttgart, of course won the World Cup with France as a right back, despite playing usually as a centre back. Apparently, there's a 35 million euro deal to take him to Bayern next year. Because,
so clinical.
Of course there is. They're incredibly good at doing this. The other rumour was Ante Rebic, who of course got to the World Cup final with Croatia. He was only bought for 2 million euros by Frankfurt at the beginning of the summer after 2 years on loan there, playing under Kovac. But he's a little bit older. I'm not sure if he's really Bayern material. I think he's 24 years old. You'd expect him, if he's going to be top class, that he'd be top class by now. Bayern are pretty much doing what they always do. They just have the best squad in the league. They will turn it over in very small areas, but overall they can afford to still roll out 34 and 35-year-old wingers. They honestly don't give a shit. The only question is if Lewandowski goes or something, or somebody actually comes in for Boateng, or if they can send Arturo Vidal to, an Alcoholics Anonymous in a different country. Like it's going to be an interesting season, I think, but probably not right at the top of the Bundesliga.
Yeah, what they'll do if Lewandowski leaves is just sign Timo Werner and somehow get him for under 50 million euros.
Yeah, well,
the season after. So
what they always do, isn't it? They just it's almost dull how much they dominate this league. But anyway, I think it's going to be an interesting season in the Bundesliga, but not in top spot. I think we all know how that's going to end up. Let's move on.
Next up are RB Leipzig, who went supernova in their debut season in the Bundesliga, finishing second, but slipped to sixth last campaign. 31 points off of first. Oh my God, but only 2 points off of third. What was happening? Absolute acid trip at the top of the Bundesliga. And they've already kind of sounded out their primary targets.
Okay.
So while they're an interesting team and an interesting setup, they're kind of looking a little bit predictable this summer. So they're going in for Ademola Lookman after he scored 5 and 11 for them, after he joined on loan from Everton because they inexplicably have deemed him surplus to requirements despite still having Yannick Bolasie and Theo Walcott on the books. Everton have rejected 2 bids already and are holding out for 20 million, which is still pretty reasonable given they want to pay 50
I'd happily pay that for him.
Richarlison. Yes, I'd snap their hand off for a player of Lookman's potential for 20 million pounds. They've also already made arguably their best signing, which is Julian Nagelsmann, who has agreed to take over from the 2019-20 season. Obviously, the very highly rated coach that led Hoffenheim from sort of bottom of the league to mid-table to eventually Champions League place. You know, and Hoffenheim were a relatively obscure club before that, weren't they?
Sure.
Owned by a software mogul, Dietmar Mopp, I think, if memory
Something like that.
serves me
Really hot.
correctly. Anyway, could be. However, in a little bit of disarray, managerially speaking, for this campaign, because Ralf Hasenhüttl, who we liked, who led them to that second place finish, like I mentioned before, they were unwilling to give him a deal past 2019, so he left. You know, he dropped Mike and left. So, who is stepping in? Because I know you like this guy, I know you like talking about him. He's kind of like multi-talented. He looks after the RB brand at large, doesn't he? And he's kind of, I respect the fact he's just been like, yeah, I'll lead the club for a year. It seems like it's no biggie for him.
Yeah, Ralf Rangnick, who's their sporting director, it looks like he's going to step in as interim manager for the next season. And it's not the first time he's done this. He did it 3 years ago. He took over as interim manager, and that was the season they got promoted to the Bundesliga. Absolutely unbelievable. They had a 58% win rate. They have lost some talent though. Obviously, Naby Keita heads off to Liverpool. Timo Werner looks like he's going to stay, but you kind of wonder for how long. Emil Forsberg has been linked with moves away constantly.
He's desperate to go, isn't he?
Yeah, which I don't really understand. I think if he's willing to go if he wants to go and you can get a decent figure for him, then let him go. Because I don't think he's that special a talent. I think he's very good. He had a very good first season in the Bundesliga, but last year, pretty underwhelming. And I think that if you bring in guys like Lookman, you don't necessarily need him quite as much.
Really strongly linked with Arsenal to the tune of around £40 million. Would you sanction that move if you were the sporting director of Arsenal?
Oh no, if I was the sporting director of Leipzig, I certainly would. But Arsenal, I don't really see what he offers. He's younger, but he's not that different to a Mkhitaryan. Mkhitaryan's been much more creative over the course of his career. He's not fast. He's not really a goal scorer. He certainly isn't on the creative level of Ozil or Mickey. So I kind of think, what's the point of this guy? Like I think he'd fit a club. I don't know.
Who are you going to say?
I was originally going to say this is the kind of thing where like West Ham going off for like 60 million. But actually Lazio are the club who I think would make a lot of sense for him. But Leipzig have already made a couple of moves. They brought in Nordi Mukiele, who's a 20-year-old centre-back, can also play right-back from Montpellier. We put him in an 11, I think, last season, flagging up his talent. They've brought in 19-year-old Brazilian striker Matheus Cunha, who scored 10 goals in 29 for Sion last season in the Swiss League, and then 20-year-old left-back Marcelo Saracchi from River Plate. So they're doing what they always do. They're shopping in kind of undervalued markets. The question will be whether they continue to keep pace at the top of the Bundesliga with those guys. With Nagelsmann coming in, the future does actually look pretty bright. So in a way, it's kind of a win-win campaign for them. If they can just stay in the kind of top 5, top 6, I think they'll be perfectly happy.
It's a bit of a bittersweet summer for the fans, right? Because, okay, we're not going to make any moves because, you know, the manager's coming in next year. That makes perfect sense. But it's kind of, they're in limbo, I suppose, for a year.
Sure.
But then that limbo is always bound to throw up a surprise, isn't it? Ralf Rangnick, never a dull moment. Let's move on to Dortmund, who weren't good last year.
Yeah, Dortmund came 4th last year, which was their lowest finish since the season that Jurgen Klopp left them. But it could have all been a lot better for them. Peter Bosz obviously joined at the beginning of the season, started well with 16 points and a plus 18 goal difference after the first 6 games. Both of those were club records, but they were a little bit naive under him, kind of like his Ajax side. Quite fun to watch in attack, but a little bit stupid in defence. And he ended up being replaced by Peter Stöger around Christmas time. Now, their new coach is Lucien Favre, who, of course, was at Borussia Mönchengladbach and then has been at Nice the last couple of seasons. He has a pre-existing relationship with Marco Reus from his time at Gladbach. Coached Reus to his most prolific scoring season in 2011-12 when he got 18 league goals. Very impressive. Their transfer window is a little bit of a mixed bag so far. They brought in Thomas Delaney from Werder Bremen for 18 mil. Not a huge fan of that. Abdou Diallo, on the other hand, for about 23 mil from Mainz. That seems great. Marius Wolf, don't really know anything about him. They've paid a pittance, 5 million euros, to get him off Frankfurt. But none of these address the gaping hole in their squad, isn't that right?
No, we've discussed them at length before, haven't we? There's a lot of wide talent in this side, but no central striker. I think Aubameyang still finished as their top goal scorer last season, despite leaving in January. Batshuayi, of course, made a very promising start to his career before getting injured come the end, but they've not really sounded him out as a permanent replacement for Aubameyang. It doesn't seem like they're going to go back in for him, maybe because Chelsea would expect more money than they're willing to part with. But like you said, they've already spent quite sizable amounts on domestic talent. So it's not like they've been saving up for a striker, to speak, which is
we
a
all
little
thought
bit
that was going to be the
confusing.
one thing they did this summer, and instead they've been doing little bits of surgery. I don't really get it.
Leaving them with Maxi Philippe as maybe their most potent goal threat. I think him and Batshuayi contributed to 16 goals post-January combined, which kind of, like we've highlighted here, intimates they need major surgery in the final third, especially if they're not prepared to pay that €40 million price tag, which has been slapped on Batshuayi by Chelsea. I mean, they've also let other attacking players go for very reasonable prices, like Yarmolenko to West Ham for 17.5 million. To me, that seems like very reasonable business, but I maybe would have held on to him until I'd brought in a 20-goal striker, because while he didn't have the greatest debut campaign in the Bundesliga last season, I quite liked elements of his numbers. And if he'd performed to expected goals, so maybe if he'd been a little bit more clinical or just a bit more lucky, I think his numbers would have been much better. So that move for me is still a little bit puzzling. But maybe they're doubling down on the talent they've got coming through, because yes, they've got Pulisic, who's great in sort of that central right-hand side position. They've got Jadon Sancho, like I said, they've got Maxi Philippe and Marius Wolf, who I know nothing about, barring having a great name. He sounds like a Bond villain. All promising, but not really goal-scoring ability in there that suggests they're going to spearhead their way back to kind of second. They're going to be that thorn in Bayern's side.
Yeah.
So again, I think all this fares very well for Bayern Munich. And I think, Alvaro Morata makes sense. I kind of suggested him on a couple of occasions for a couple of different sides, but who could they really move for, Patrick, that's going to make the biggest difference?
I mean, that would be the best striker they could possibly get. And when I say that, actually, I don't think they could get him. I don't know, they could go and look at the Eredivisie, take a gamble, on someone like Ali Reza Jahanbakhsh, that it looks like he's going off to Brighton. If they really want a dedicated centre forward, it's extremely difficult. A lot of them have been mopped up by La Liga this season, with like Carl Toko Ekambi going from Angers to Villarreal. I don't know.
I think Lozano maybe.
But he's not a centre forward either.
Yeah, but how much would he? I trust him to score. If we're going to replace Yarmolenko, maybe on the wing.
I don't know. I kind of think that between Royce and Jadon Sancho, you've got that sorted. It's just that striker position. I mean, yeah, we can talk about Martial again and those kind of guys, but you look at how Lyon do it. I think that Lyon have actually maybe overtaken Dortmund in their ability to spot these kind of these young stars. Like getting Mariano in is exactly the sort of thing that Dortmund should be doing. So maybe there's our answer. They go to Atletico Madrid and ask about Correa. That would be really exciting because he can play centre forward. He has done before, and it would give them a very fluid, interchanging attack. That'd be fun. Or Batshuayi, it's right there.
So that was our 18-19 review for La Liga and the Bundesliga, guys. Obviously, we only spoke about the big sides, so if you've seen any movers and shakers from the smaller sides, let us know in the comments below. Patrick?
Yeah, if you want to watch more of this, and God knows why you would, because this was probably immensely long, then head over to FD, where this week Transfer Review is sitting. We've gone over some of the big moves, Higuain, Martial, they're all in there. So check that out and then drop us a like and comment, subscribe, all that normal stuff.
Patrick trying to be YouTuber.
I don't care.